vintage guitar people? Welcome to Have Guitar Will Travel, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine, with your host, me, James Patrick Regan, otherwise known as Jimmy from the Deadlies. And today I'm speaking with the original guitarist and leader of the band Firefall, Jock Bartley. In our conversation, Jock discusses briefly what living in Colorado is like, both now and early on, and why he never made the move to LA. Jock tells us about the two most recent Firefall releases, both concept albums, focusing on the songs of Firefall's contemporary bands, most of which the original members of Firefall were at times members of. Jock talks about his early musical experiences studying with guitarist Johnny Smith in Colorado Springs on a Gibson ES-140 he bought from Johnny's shop. Jock describes being hired by Graham Parsons and Emmylou early on and touring with them. And Jock tells us about his guitars, his 1958 Gibson Sunburst Les Paul and his 1959 Fender Telecaster, as well as a custom Paul Reed Smith that he plays through Fender Supers. Jock then explains the formation of Firefall, which was a type of supergroup for the era. And then after the heyday for the band, he kept the band alive to this point. Finally, Jock tells us why he's considering selling his 1958 Les Paul. To find out more about what Jock and Firefall are up to, you can go to their website, firefallofficial.com. That's FIREFALL official.com. Please subscribe, like, comment, share, and most of all, review this podcast. I really appreciate it. And please support Vintage Guitar Magazine and all the wonderful things they do for us guitar players, because they do so many wonderful things for us guitar players. Here's my friend Jock.
Hey.
Hey, how are you, Jock? You look great.
Oh, I wish I felt great, but hey. Where are you at? California, of course.
I'm in Northern Napa, California.
Napa, all right. You've been out in the sun, baby.
You know, it is California.
It is California.
How's everything with you?
Really well, thank you.
So you're in Denver. You told me earlier.
I'm halfway between Denver and Boulder.
Okay.
Boulder is, of course, one of the coolest places there is, and I live in Westminster and do my guitar thing.
Yeah, right on. And Firefall is still active?
Yes, sir. We just we've made 2 albums in the last 3 years.
Wow.
The last one, Friends and Family, was a concept record where our manager and label suggested that the original Firefall guys had played in other famous bands like the Byrds and the Burritos and Spirit and JoJo Gunn and me with Graham and Emmylou.
Sure.
You know, why don't you guys do an album of their material? And I went, that's a great idea. But I said, let's expand that. And because in 76, when our first album came out and hit so big, we got to tour with, the Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac on the White Album, and then during Rumors, which were some of the best gigs I ever played.
Yeah.
And, and Leonard Skinner and Marshall Tucker and Loggins and Messina. I said, let's do songs from theirs, too. And the label guy went, add a side, let's go. So our Friends and Family album of a year or year and a half ago, I knew it wasn't going to get on the radio, and I knew it wasn't going to really get in stores or sell and anything. But to have a new album out, even of other people's songs that we lovingly and respectfully recreated and put our own slant to, was really great. And it went so well that I just finished producing Friends and Family 2.
Wow.
Which the first 2 singles have already been released off that. The new album, number 2, comes out May 23rd. So, to be in my 70s and still be making records,
yeah,
and touring, and hey, we got a gig in Baltimore. Okay, great. It's like, geez, it's I know how lucky I am to still be doing this.
Well, I mean, it's well deserved. You're a fantastic musician. You're basically an icon.
Thanks. I don't really believe that. I've been a really lucky guy, and I finally realized, that people thinking I was a rock star was true, a number of years ago. But an icon, no, I know some icons. And I'm just a lucky guitar player that's got some gold records and played really good in the 70s,
But still, I mean, are you? I mean, you don't have a day job, right? This is you.
Oh, fuck no.
Yeah.
I haven't had a job since banging nails in the 80s.
Okay. All right. So you did have to bang nails in the 80s?
Yeah, it's funny because Firefall hit it so big, and the sound that we had, which was the singer-songwriters Rick Roberts, who wrote most of our hits, and Larry Burnett from Washington, D.C., Mark Andes and I, and Michael Clark, Mark on bass from Spirit and JoJo Gunn, and Michael Clark from the Byrds and the Flying Breeder Brothers on drums. We were just like, wow. We had 20 or 25 original songs, to learn on our first week of practice, which is unheard of and just so fortuitous and amazing. And, Firefall's always been about songs. And then the singers of the songs, number two. And then third comes guitar parts and flute parts and what the band sounds like. But with those guys, with Mark and Michael as the rhythm section and me as lead guitar player, then playing on the two singer-songwriters songs, we didn't have to try to sound like anybody. We sounded just like us.
Yeah. Growing up, where did you grow up? What town did you grow up in?
I was born in Kansas. My mom was a musician that she never really got to do anything with it. Piano, accordion. She did Sweet Adelines, the barbershop quartet stuff.
Sure.
When we moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado from Kansas, we moved up in the mountains pretty close to Pikes Peak. I showed an interest in guitar, and I really wanted to play guitar when I was 9 years old, 8.5 and 9 years old. And she happened to have heard about the world-famous jazz guitar player Johnny Smith, who had 12 or 14 jazz records out on Blue Note and Verve, and he dropped out of the New York jazz scene and moved to Colorado Springs with his new wife.
Yes.
And he opened a music store.
Yes.
And I became one of his first students as an 8.5-year-old kid.
Wow.
Playing the Gibson guitar. My first guitars were always Gibsons because he was a Gibson endorser.
Yeah. Yep. I get it. You don't by any chance know Kenny Vaughn, do you?
Oh, of course I do.
And he's from that same area, correct?
Yeah. And he and I've talked a little bit about Johnny Smith. I think I'm about the only guy I know that had the great fortune to be a student of Johnny Smith's, but I've talked to a lot of guys, including Kenny, that said, "Oh, I used to go into Johnny's store and buy strings and talk to him." And it's like, and for me, that was probably the most fortunate happening that happened to me musically. And Johnny Smith could play faster than anybody, and he didn't always do that, He'd play slow, and his whole thing was melodic, baby. Play melodies. You're not just playing guitar licks. And I assimilated all that stuff and was was his little jazz guitar prodigy that he was trying to cultivate until February 9th, 1964 happened, and everybody saw the Beatles. I'm not playing jazz anymore. Fuck that.
What kind of guitar did you have when you were early on?
I had, my first guitar was a Gibson 3/4 size electric guitar, single cutaway, ES-145.
Yeah.
With a pickup kind of up under the neck.
Yeah. Yep.
So my first guitar was a Gibson electric. It's like, oh my God, I have so many friends that, are guitar players that said, God, I had a Sears Airline guitar. Well, in fact, I saw the Sears catalog and I saw the guitar that probably had the amp built into the case.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Only $59 with an amp in the case. And I really, really wanted my mom to buy me that.
Sure.
It was red. It was like, electric guitar. But she was smart enough to know that wasn't probably much of an instrument. And she found Johnny Smith, who for a long time endorsed Gretsch guitars, and then he changed over and became a Gibson endorser.
Yeah.
So that was I've had a lot of fortuitous things happen in my life, but that was maybe one of the main ones.
And what kind of stuff would Johnny teach you?
He would teach me. Well, like I said, I think he thought I was going to be the next jazz prodigy. So I was learning all this jazz stuff and, minor 11th chords with flat sevens.
Yeah.
When I was like 12 or 13. And and I'd go home and I'd listen to the radio and I'd learn how to play, La Bamba or Twist and Shout or something.
Yep.
And, but to have a training by somebody like that, I'm friends with John Jorgensen and, and he's going, wow, that must have been amazing. Because John, talk about, he can play 20 different instruments and know everything about the music he's playing and read music and sight read. And oh boy,
Yep.
And I haven't ever had to sight read except when I was like 9, 10, or 11 years old, And then when the Beatles hit, I went, I'm getting in a band. Yeah, and I already had a guitar, so I was a step ahead of everybody else.
And what was the first band you played in?
The first band was called the Countdowns. I was a freshman in high school.
Wow.
And the other three guys were either juniors or seniors at Manitou Springs High School. And they'd, of course, have to sneak me into all the 3-2 bars we were playing at.
Yep, yeah.
3-2, baby, is like beer that didn't really get you off.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so, I've been playing lead guitar and taking solos and, okay, take a Jock, since I was like 13 or 14. And I probably wasn't very good back then, but as my style developed, and with all that training, and the main thing with Johnny Smith that I got from him, and I don't think he ever told me this, was being a tasteful player, a tasteful soloist.
Yeah.
Is not about what you play, it's more about what you don't play.
Yeah.
And the spaces you leave are as important as any damn lick you could play.
Yep.
In fact, more so. And, even when I was just playing, cover songs in my Boulder band after I went to college at Boulder, or even in high school or something, I probably didn't know at all what I was doing, but I'd learn the, Louie, I'd learn that lead guitar part, as much as I could. And that was the thing that I had to jump on, is because already having played guitar for about 4 or 5 years, when I started listening to rock records, I could kind of figure out what the guy was doing.
Yeah.
And certainly not anything too difficult, but most rock records back then were like, and I just hit it at the right time and, was an electric guitar player ready to go, and in Boulder played in a bunch of bands and, got picked up, by pure chance by Graham Parsons, Emmylou Harris, and the Fallen Angels, who got to their first gig in Boulder and realized that the guy that they had hired sight unseen wasn't that good. And they put the word out, and the club owner called me and said, get your ass down here. You might get a gig. And I went, with who? He said, Graham Parsons. And I went, who? The Birds, the Flying Breeder Brothers. Oh, yeah, the Flying Breeder Brothers, sure. And the interesting thing was, James, is that I was a pretty good picker, but I was not a country picker. And I had zero, playing country music and that's what Graham was, is he was, he was playing the dirt country. And, so I wasn't the best member that they could have gotten for that tour. In fact, there was probably 5 or 6 or 8 better country guitar players in Boulder when I got hired. But I was at the right place in the right time, and I sat in with them, and I was backstage, and they called me into the dressing room at a little place called the Pioneer Inn in Nederland, Colorado, up in the mountains. And they said, I got the gig.
Wow.
I went, you got the gig? I got the gig. Yeah, we leave at 10 a.m. tomorrow, going to Austin, Texas. I went, what? We leave tomorrow? Yeah, you better be ready. We're leaving from the Holiday Inn. And I went, wow. So I got, Neil Flans, the late great steel guitar player, tried to teach me the songs and all of James Burton's great country licks. On the bus driving down to Austin, Texas.
And what were you playing? What kind of guitar were you and amp were you playing at that point?
Well, forever, I was playing my vintage '58 Cherry Sunburst Les Paul.
Wow.
It's really dark red.
Yeah, it is.
And then I was going to show you my
your Black
my Telecaster.
Yeah.
That during the Barnstorm days in Boulder, Joe Walsh, I was kind of lamenting about that the Telecaster had no sustain compared to my Les Paul.
Sure.
And he said, well, hey, buy a humbucking pickup or you can come over to the house and I'll put it in for you. So Joe Walsh installed the humbucking pickup in my '59 Telecaster.
Yeah, right on.
But anyway, to go back to your question, so I wasn't a country player.
Yeah.
I hurried home and I told my girlfriend, I'm leaving for a month and a half. And she went, what? Yeah, here's money for the rent. I got to take off. I got a gig with Graham and Emmylou. We leave at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
So I took forever. My sound was my '58 Les Paul through an old Fender Super reverb.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
In twins, you got to get so loud they don't ever break up. But a Super, wah, it's great. And I figured, well, this is country music. I better take my Telecaster.
Yeah.
So I took my Telecaster. But most of the time at gigs with Graham, I played my Les Paul, and did my best to cop some of the James Burton licks.
Yeah.
Which, the master Telecaster player is like, oh, God. So really, they could have had a better country picker than me, but I was at the right place at the right time, and I was a good player.
Yeah.
I held my own, I guess. And that was one of the biggest breaks that I had, and the stepping stone to, well, it was interesting. We played at Max's Kansas City in New York City.
Yeah.
Playing country music, at Max's Kansas City.
Yeah.
And the day after Graham and Emmylou left, Rick Roberts, as a solo strummer guy, was going to play the Max's Kansas City. And, of course, when Graham joined into the Byrds and took them in Sweetheart of the Rodeo country way.
Yeah.
And then he got tired of being in the Byrds after less than a year. And he quit, and Chris Hillman quit too, and they started the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Yeah.
And that lasted until Graham got tired of the Flying Burrito Brothers and being in a band, and quit. And Rick Roberts was asked by Chris Hillman to join the Burrito Brothers.
Yeah.
And so when I fell into Graham and Emmylou, it was Rick Roberts and kind of Chris Hillman who discovered Emmylou Harris in a little bar in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And later called Graham out in L.A., said, I think we found the gal that you've been looking for.
Yeah.
Sure enough. So for me to have fallen into that whole thing, and Chris Hillman and Michael Clark from the Byrds, who later became Firefall's drummer, and, all of that SoCal, Los Angeles area, great, the beginnings of folk rock with the Byrds.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you relocate to Southern California?
I'm glad I didn't. No, and you know what? I was thinking, and I replaced Tommy Bolin in the band Zephyr and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So I had my sets, my sights kind of set high enough to that I knew that I probably needed to go to L.A.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, and not too many people know, now I know, James, you know, but everybody knows about when Henley and Fry and Stephen Stills and Richie Furay and all those people moved from other parts of the country or Canada and moved to L.A.
Sure.
Everybody knows about the migration to L.A. and how the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield and all that Mamas and Papas stuff, how the L.A. sound was it.
Yeah.
The part that a lot of people don't know about, really, is that probably in about 74, 75, 76, a lot of the rock stars from Los Angeles got sick of being in Los Angeles and the smog and leaving tour and going home to Los Angeles, and a lot of them moved to the mountains above Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, wow.
So Stephen Stills, Richie Furay, Joe Walsh, Dan Fogelberg, Mark Andes from Los Angeles, Carl Wilson from suddenly the mountains above Boulder was like the center of the musical universe for about 2 years.
Wow. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah. And so, and when Firefall was just forming in Boulder, Colorado, even before Michael Clark fell into the band and got hired by Rick Roberts, when we were a 4-piece band, a 5-piece band with a different drummer, playing little clubs, Stephen Stills would come and sit in with us, or, oh my God, there's Chris Hillman. Great, come on up, Chris. What do you want to do? Hey, let's do Rock and Roll Star. And Chris would go, nah. And I go, oh yeah, come on, please. So to have, I should have moved to L.A., and I'm really glad I didn't, because a lot of L.A. moved to Boulder.
Oh yeah, yeah. And did Graham ever take you to Nudies and get you a suit and everything?
That's an interesting question. No. And when I went out, okay, so they sent me, Graham and the Fallen Angels sent me home to Colorado. They took the bus. I guess Graham and Emmylou flew, and they met the bus in L.A., and they started working on Graham's second album. There's Grievous Angel, and there's, God, why I'm drawing a blank here. Anyway, they started making the second record.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, wow, maybe I should go out to L.A. Who knows, maybe I'll get on this record. Now, little did I know that they certainly didn't need me, because James Burton was back in the fold, and Clarence White and all these amazing players, that could play, country music to a T. And as most people know, or maybe don't know, Graham finished his last album, his last lead vocal track, and decided to go out to Joshua Tree with an old girlfriend. And Graham had really cleaned it up and wasn't doing much of anything. Yeah. And he cut back on his drinking, and he wasn't doing the other bad stuff that he and Keith Richards used to do. Yeah. And he went out and did some of it and killed himself the day after the album was finished.
Wow.
So Grievous Angel got put out with, so what had happened with me, anyway, they put out Grievous Angel, and Graham had already died, and Emmylou was thinking about a solo career, because what am I going to do now? She's thinking.
Exactly.
But what's interesting was I decided to go out and see if I still had a gig.
Yeah.
And I drove from Boulder to Los Angeles, and I went and visited Phil and Emmylou. And Graham had just left, didn't see Graham. Yeah. He just left to go to
Joshua Tree.
Yeah. And I said my highs, and I said, well, I'll come back tomorrow, the next day or whatever, and we'll see what's going on. And I went to Nudies that day.
Okay.
Actually, the night that Graham died, it probably was.
Wow.
I went to Nudies and met Nudie and took a picture with him and stuff. Graham had given me when I first joined the tour, I didn't really have any country stage clothes.
Sure.
Yeah. So Graham gave me a Nudie rhinestone tie and a Nudie shirt.
Yeah.
So I had a shirt and a tie from Nudies long before I even knew anything about Nudies or the Rodeo Taylor and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I went back the next day. I didn't buy anything at Nudies, but I looked around and got to meet Nudie and Manuel and the whole deal. I went back the next day to Phil's house, and they had just heard the news.
Oh, wow.
And, and as you can imagine, Emmylou was just
devastated,
heartbroken, dumbfounded, just in shock. Couldn't believe it. And, I ended up, it was such a strange day. And, and Phil Kaufman was kind of beating himself up for not having been with Graham that night.
Yeah.
And, and I drove back to Colorado and soon thereafter got together with Rick Roberts.
Yeah. And do you keep in contact with Emmylou and Phil to this day, or have you
No.
No.
Emmylou's such a big international star.
Yeah.
I went and heard her play at Red Rocks 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I got backstage and I got to go say hi and introduce myself again. And she goes, "Jock, God, nice to see you."
Yeah.
But no, I do keep a hold of Phil Kaufman. And I do, like, it was Emmylou's birthday, I think last week or 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I said, "Please tell Emmylou happy birthday from me." No, I don't keep in touch with her, although she's a vibrant part of my past.
Sure. How did the formation of Firefall come? It almost sounds like a super group.
Well, yeah. And in fact, our first ad after our first album came out said, "Don't call us a super group." This is Atlantic Records and Billboard magazine.
Yeah. "Don't
call us a super group. Call us Firefall."
Okay.
And there was variations of that ad, which I still have some of, but it was a fated thing.
Yeah.
It really was, and the heavens aligned for me and meeting Rick Roberts and you live in Boulder, I live in Boulder too. Now, when he heard me play with Graham, he thought, "This guy can't play country music." He didn't think I was very good, and at country music, I really wasn't. But we got together in Boulder, and I kept saying, "Man, we should get together and jam." And he's kind of going, "Yeah." And he came to Tulagi's, where I was playing in a band with Stanley Sheldon, who soon thereafter would become Peter Frampton's bass player.
Okay.
And we're rocking in a band, and he's going, "This guy's the same guy." You put me in a rock and roll element playing slide with my super reverb turned up to 9 or 10, boy. My Les Paul. So he came up and said, "Hey, man, let's..." And suddenly Rick is saying, "Yeah, we should get together. I'm making a third solo record on A&M, and I'd love you to be my guitar player." And I went, "Great." And of course, Joe Walsh and the whole Don Henley kind of thing had helped him with his first couple of solo records.
Yeah, yep.
After he'd been in the Burrito Brothers. So I thought I was going to be the guitar player on his third solo record, Rick Roberts. And then Mark Andes had moved to the mountains above Boulder also.
Okay.
Mark Andes, the guy who kind of looked like Adonis of the old pictures, the striking blonde, guy from Southern California with a tan. Oh my God. And of course, Mark is one of the best bass players around.
Yeah.
And he started jamming with us. And as soon as he started jamming with us, and it was Rick and his songs and his singing, and Mark and I as the players, the guitar player and the bass player, Rick said, "I know this guy in Washington, D.C. named Larry Burnett. He's a great singer-songwriter, and he and I sing great together. Do you guys want to hear a song? And Mark and I went, sure, let's hear it.
Yeah.
And this, of course, was way before cassette tape, so I'm pretty sure it was a reel-to-reel. And the first song we heard of Larry's was Cinderella.
Oh, wow.
Which Larry wrote when he was 16 years old.
Oh, my God.
Unbelievable. And Mark and I went, oh, my God, get him out here.
Yeah.
And Rick flew Larry out from D.C. Larry didn't have a gig. He was just playing solo acoustic shows around the D.C. area.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, when Larry came out and we actually had rehearsals, we didn't have a band name yet. We weren't Firefall.
Yeah.
Didn't have any gigs. We were just working on songs because every one of those guys had a taste of the big time and making records and being on the radio. And, hey, this is where we want to aim. And our first week, we had 20 or 25 songs. And the amazing thing about that was that many of those songs were good enough to a year and a half later be on our first record, like
Wow.
Mexico and Livin' Ain't Livin' and Cinderella and, Sad Old Love Song. And a lot of these songs, we had the album was handed to Mark Andes, myself, and Michael Clark and say, now what are you guys going to do?
Yeah.
It was amazing. So, and then we realized in order, here's the end of that story too. Just fated how things happen. So Rick and I had been playing out on the road with the Chris Hillman Band.
Okay.
Okay. And Chris was playing bird songs and, some Souther Hillman Fury songs and whatever.
Yep.
And we were out playing as the Chris Hillman Band. And we were on a little East Coast swing that was going to end in New York City.
Okay.
Now, our manager, Rick's manager, and our demo tape, which we made, that Chris Hillman produced our 3-song Firefall demo tape to try to get a record deal.
Sure.
And we were shopping it to everybody, and nobody was taking it, right?
Yep.
And so Mark actually joined into the Chris Hillman Band because Chris wanted to play more mandolin and guitar than playing bass.
Uh-huh.
So Mark became the bass player. So there's 3 Firefall guys playing in the Chris Hillman Band.
Yeah.
And Chris, a day before we get to New York, finds out that he has hepatitis, and the doctor says, go home get in bed.
Oh, no.
And Chris says, fuck, and we had one more gig in New York City, a 3-night stand, and the manager and Rick Roberts were smart enough to tell the place in New York City, hey, we can fly 2 of our guys out. We'll finish the gig as Firefall.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 of us are here already, and we're about to get a record deal. So, hey, we'll finish the gig. And they went, we don't have to try to find a band to play tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And we flew out, Larry Burnett and Michael Clark, and suddenly we're playing, it might have been at the other end in New York City. Earlier, I might have told you the wrong venue.
Oh, that's okay.
But anyway, we played, and our manager, Rick Roberts' manager, told Atlantic Records, hey, they're playing in town, come down and see them. And the first night, there was 4 or 5 guys from Atlantic Records there. Mm-hmm. And then the second night, I'm almost positive that the same 4 guys came, but brought Ahmet Erdogan with them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Ahmet came and saw the boys from Boulder playing, and we had all Rick and Larry songs, and we were a rock band.
Yeah.
It's like we didn't have a keyboard or flute player yet, so it was like, time to take a solo, go, Jock. And within 2 weeks, we got a record deal with Atlantic Records for 7 albums.
Wow.
Unbelievable timing.
Yeah.
And that's when we realized, and Rick Roberts knew David Muse, the saxophone flute keyboard player from Florida. God rest his soul. He died last year, 2 years ago.
Sorry.
But David came out, and, the songs were magic. The singing was magic. And the playing behind that with David's flute and sax, or my lead guitar, and Mark and Michael on the rhythm section, we were destined to have a gold record, I'll tell you. It really feels that way. And there they are.
Yeah, that's a wall full of them. I mean, just what was the music industry like after you achieved some success? What was the music industry like as far as, I mean, like, were you doing Don Kirshner's or Midnight Special or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, it's interesting because our biggest 3 years were 76, 77, and 78.
Uh-huh.
By 79, we still thought we were big rock stars, and we were touring with Kenny Loggins and Marshall Tucker and playing, big venues and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the bottom for us was starting to fall out.
Okay.
And by the 80s, rock radio kind of changed, and suddenly the Eagles and Firefall and Dan Fogelberg weren't as popular because, acoustic guitars and 3-part harmonies. It's the 80s, damn it. But, I've said on a few interviews lately that the 70s, the late 60s and the 70s will never, ever happen again musically.
Oh, yeah. Probably
the greatest decade ever for rock and roll and stuff. And the reason is if you had songs and a singer and a sound, record labels would hire you.
Yeah.
They would sign you, and they knew that maybe half of the people they were signing wouldn't be success. But if you got some radio play and it looked good, they'd spend money on you, and they'd go to town for you.
Yeah.
As soon as the 80s came around, suddenly the record labels wanted to get involved in the creative process. And I remember when we were in the 80s working on our 4th or 5th album, Atlantic Records sent an A&R guy to sit in on the working out of the songs and make suggestions. And, hey, we'd like you to do this song, or we don't think that song's good enough, or, and suddenly, bean counter record labels out of New York were thinking they were part of the band, and that sucked. And a lot of bands suffered from that in the 80s, I think.
Sure. Yeah. And was there ever a time when there was no Firefall, or did you just keep it going through everything?
There was a time after the original band broke up, where it took me a few months to realize that the legal agreement that we had drawn up and signed as a band, it said that if you quit the band Firefall, you gave up title to the name.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that I was the only guy that didn't quit.
Yeah.
David Muse was the next to last guy, and Rick Roberts was the next to last guy over David. And when I was the only guy standing, I kind of went, wow, if I wanted to, I could form a new Firefall with really great singers. And, because, hell, we got hits and gold records, we'll be able to go out on the road and play and everything. So I kind of became the beneficiary of all that. And, and it was really great because our audience, even in the 80s and 90s, seemed to grow.
Yeah.
Even though, we couldn't buy radio play. Radio changed so dramatically in the 80s that, even amazing artists like, Fogelberg or now the Eagles kind of reformed in the 80s or early 90s or something and tried to make a comeback and stuff. But 70s was where all of that music belonged and people got used to. But who knew, thinking about the present in the last 20 years, I've been making a really good living off of Firefall and Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett's songs and our sound and those records. I've been making a really good living off it for the last 30 years.
Good for you. I'm glad to hear that. And are you guys, do you play out actively?
Yeah.
I don't have two tour dates in front of me, so I don't know.
This year, thankfully, is a lot sparser. Even 10 years ago, we'd be gone 3 weekends a month and be playing like 8 or 10 shows a month.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like, God, I couldn't have a dog or a cat or even pets in my house, and it's really not, we're kind of weekend warriors now. And with these 2 Friends and Family albums out, which if you haven't heard any of that, you should go on Amazon and listen to a few songs because it was so great on those albums. Honoring not only the 70s and the bands and the songs that we were duplicating in our own way, but it was just so amazing to be able to put a stamp on that. And, I knew that, there's a whole bunch of 30 and 40-year-olds who, I've never heard of Steely Dan before or the Eagles. Who are those guys? That's probably the bad one to use, but it's like, Little River Band, so it was really great. It was kind of like a history lesson and on our first single off of Friends and Family 2 that happened earlier this year. It was Stephen Stills' song "Love the One You're With."
Sure, yeah.
And I asked my drummer friend from Boulder, who is now married to Winona Cactus Mosier, if he wanted to play drums on the song. He said, sure, because the original Stephen Stills song only has Joe Lala on percussion and Stephen playing, many, many acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
And I knew on our version, I definitely wanted to put drums and make it more of a rock song.
Yeah.
And after I talked to Cactus and he said, in Nashville, and he said, sure, I'd love to play for it. I told him, I said, so... And I knew Winona. Winona had done one of my suicide preventions, Michael McDonald and Winona.
Okay.
On a song of mine, Call on Me. So I kind of became a spokesperson for suicide prevention for a couple of years.
Okay.
And I knew Winona from that. But I asked Cactus, do you think your lovely wife would want to sing on Love the One You're With by Stephen Stills? And Cactus says, that's a great idea. I'm sure her producer's going to love it. And I went, wow, that's great. And he said, of course, I'm her producer. So we had Winona and Cactus as guest appearances on that song.
Wow. And
we got Richie Furay from the Buffalo Springfield and Polka on the second record too.
Wow.
And in fact, you know what? The picking of those songs for Friends and Family, some of them were easy. On our first album, Angry Eyes by Loggins and Messina was a natural. Mm-hmm. It already sounded like Firefall, Yeah. But, which Doobie Brothers song or which Heart song should we do? Oh, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny because I didn't know, the picking of the songs was a really fun thing. And, that's where this story was going. So on this second record, which isn't out yet, I said, well, we did a Neil Young song on the first album, but we didn't do a Stephen Stills we did a Buffalo Springfield song, but we didn't do Stephen Stills. So, and Buffalo Springfield, and one of my very favorite Buffalo Springfield songs, I was in high school, was Mr. Soul by Neil Young. Right?
Yep.
And I said, oh, God, we got to cut Mr. Soul. And once we did that, I realized, hey, we could probably get Richie Furay, who was in the Buffalo Springfield with Stephen and Neil.
Yeah.
We could probably get Richie to sing the same harmony part on our version with me singing lead as he did with Neil Young back in 1968. And that's another kind of cool story about some of the stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. What does your guitar collection look like right now? Apart from
I stopped a pretty long time ago.
Okay.
I was going to show you my Les Paul and my Telecaster. Where are they? I was going to show you. Those are my two main ones. I got a couple other vintage ones. An old Gibson stereo 345 and stuff. And I got a 12-string and I got a couple of acoustics. But I never I probably end up having maybe 8 or 9 or maybe 10 guitars.
Yeah.
But I haven't bought a new guitar for decades.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get, those vintage ones for a very reasonable price back when they were still reasonably priced.
Yeah. And when you do your shows, what are you playing there?
I have a custom PRS.
Okay.
From the second year Paul Reed Smith was in effect, and it's the closest thing. I remember when I realized I've got to retire that Les Paul. I can't keep playing that Les Paul on the road. And at one point, it did get tipped over by somebody wandering around the stage and cracked the neck.
Oh my God!
And I went, fuck that, Yeah. So when I heard about Paul Reed Smith stuff, I went and played one in Boulder at the music store, and wow, I ordered one from Paul when he had just started in his second year.
Okay.
And I said, I want a blue one.
Yeah. And
he said, okay. And I looked on his webpage, and the only blue that they had was this really dark blue. I went, no. I want it a lot brighter than that.
Yeah.
He said, well, we don't make any with bright ones. I said, so can you give me a special color? And he said, oh, yeah. So anyway, long story short, and I'm about to show you this, a long story short, they came up with this color of PRS. Okay, let me.
Oh, yeah.
That Paul said, well, what should we call it? How about Bartley Blue? And I went, no, that's ridiculous. How about, and we came up with Colorado Blues. So
right on.
I have the only Colorado Blue PRS in existence.
Wow.
And it sure sounds great. And you know what? It took the place of my Les Paul live. It's great because I love, for me as a lead guitar player, playing through a rental amp every night.
Yeah, right? I was going to ask you about that.
And I use a Roland JC120 and just, which has a great clean channel and great chorus, has the worst distortion channel in the business, but I never go there. I have a distortion pedal, an overdraft pedal.
Yeah.
But I love it so when I'm cooking on stage and I'm playing Mexico or some of the Firefall songs that really, rock the most, with your guitar on, loud behind you, and your monitor where you're hearing you singing, you've also got your guitar. Yeah. You can find a place in between that. It's all very spontaneous, and not every night it happens. But sometimes I can walk into an area where don't move, and the sustain between your amp 8 feet that way and your monitor 10 feet that way, and your guitar going, you can hold just about any note on any string, any fret, for as long as you want.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me go back to Johnny Smith. Oh, so I can play one note and hold it for 30 seconds? That kind of opens it up for me. I don't have to play so much,
Yeah.
But and I'm a Les Paul Reed Smith player, and I love my Telecaster. And when we're making an album, I play my Telecaster more than anything else, just because it's such a great rhythm guitar. I mean, Telecasters, oh my God. But as a soloist, I'm much more in the Santana, Clapton, Les Paul kind of vein than any of the country Telecaster players.
Yeah. But at home, what do you have for amps?
Well, I have a bunch of Fender amps, and my baby is my old Fender Super with 410s.
Okay, right on.
And I've got a couple of smaller Fender amps, but and at one point, I remember when we started our second record in it probably was at the end of '76, and the second record of Firefall, Lunacy, was going to come out in '77. I blew up my Super Reverb at a gig we played at Gusman Hall in Miami, playing it at 10 and going, wah, and it blew up. And Dallas Shue, the roadie, who's of U2 and everybody famous. Dallas is the top road guitar guy in the world now. He and I went through, must have been 20 different amps once it came time for me to do the solos on the second record. Yeah. And, you know, we never could get it back to what that Super Reverb, that Fender Super was like. And I've got a good friend here in Colorado who has a business where he rebuilds Fender amps and has the original grill cloth and blah, blah, blah and everything. And he got my Super Reverb working at 10, 20, 15 years ago. And that's my baby. And
right on.
I'll tell you what, either my Les Paul or my Paul Reed Smith through a Fender Super cranked, turn it up, baby.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's great. And if people want to find out about Firefall, where you're playing and stuff, where do they go?
Our website is firefallofficial.com.
Okay.
We have some of our upcoming shows. We have none and we played 2 already. No more in April, couple in May. Yeah. June and July are starting to get really busy.
Okay.
And we play a fair amount of gigs with our friends in bands like Atlanta Rhythm Section or Orleans or Pure Prairie League or you know, so it's really great. And you know what's really fun for me, James, nowadays is, I mean, I love doing a long headline Firefall show. Yeah. You know, where we get to play 2 hours or, you know, 90 minutes minimum or whatever. But when we go do these gigs where there's 3 other bands and us, whether we're opening show, closing the show, somewhere in the middle, and you're given like 40 minutes to play, it's like, bam, you go. And in Firefall's case, thank you, Rick Roberts, you know, we have another hit. We have enough hit songs and radio-friendly songs to play in a 35-minute set that it's like, okay, go play the hits and get out of there. Not a bad deal at all.
Not a bad deal at all. Do you still have the rhinestone necklace or necktie? And
I do.
Shirt? You do?
Yeah, I do. And you know what? I wore it out.
Oh, did you?
And it's really funky. And Manuel Cuevas, who was Nudi's right-hand guy.
Sure.
Manuel has an active rodeo tailor shop going in Nashville.
Yes, he does.
And I ordered a new tie in the vein of the one that Graham gave me.
Right on.
And so I got it. And it wasn't exactly the same. It was a little bigger than the one that Graham gave me. But it's like, okay. Yeah. You know, I got my rhinestone tie back now. And, you know, Nudies, you know. I wish I would have had a camera when I was in L.A. because Nudie, you know, showed me his Lincoln Continental with the, you know, decked out with, you know, hundreds of silver dollars and cow horns. And I'm sure you've seen the Nudie's car.
Yes. I think it's sitting at the Crystal Palace in Bakersfield.
What's the Crystal Palace?
The Crystal Palace is Buck Owens. Of course, Buck is passed, but it's Buck Owens' club that he had in Bakersfield, and I think he got that car from Nudie, and it's above the bar.
Oh my God! Yeah, it was so weird because looking back, I met and went to Nudie's. And, you know, saw the car and did everything. Yeah. The night after, and we didn't know yet, the night after Graham died.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Really crazy.
Yeah. Well, you know, I could talk to you for hours, but I don't. Unfortunately, I think our time's just about up.
I think so too. Here, I'm going to show you one. I'll tell you what, that cherry sunburst. You see a lot of these.
Yeah, that's the darkest.
And they faded, or they're like tawny, kind of blonde sunburst or anything.
Yeah.
The ink on my cherry sunburst has not faded a bit.
Yeah. And is it a 58 or a 59?
It's a 58.
Okay. All right. Wow.
But you know what? It's interesting. about a year and a half ago, they did a Colorado Music Hall of Fame show about Tommy Bolin and Zephyr.
Uh-huh.
And I got asked to play with David and Zephyr, and on the Tommy Bolin part of the thing, they had Joe Bonamassa and Warren Hayes come. And so I brought my Les Paul, knowing that Bonamassa has like 200 of them. And, you know, and after our sound check, and Joe was kind of hanging around, I just went up and introduced myself. I said, Jock Bartley of Firefall and everything, and I had my Les Paul in hand.
Yeah.
And he just kind of like, oh, yeah. And then he saw the Les Paul and went, oh, my God. And he grabbed it and he said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, I've been told it's a 58, but somebody told me it's a 59 neck. He said, that's right.
Wow.
58. And he goes, 58, it's just because of this and this. And he's pointing out different stuff and everything. But this 59, this is a 59 neck. And Bob, and he must have talked to me for like 30 minutes about my guitar.
Right on.
And how great it was, and blah, blah, blah. And if I ever wanted to sell it, you know, and all this kind of stuff, you know. So, I have a 58 Les Paul with which I was told, a 1959 neck.
Yeah. That's fantastic. That's absolutely.
But anyway, that's my baby. And, you know, sadly, I've realized that I may have to sell that guitar pretty soon.
Oh, no.
Because if I die and either my son or my daughter tried to get top dollar for that 58 Cherry Sunburst Les Paul, they wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
And I have so many other guitars that I would really hate to, you know, to get rid of it, and it would hurt my soul and everything. But from a practical matter, it would be great to be able to say, okay, here's the nest egg that I'm giving my grandchildren and my kids and their college fund and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So I don't know, but I am so pleased and happy to have those three guitars that, you know.
There's nothing sad about that, though. That's the ultimate giving right there. I mean, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, thanks, Jock.
Cool. Well, James, have a good one out in Northern California.
Yeah, well, you have a good one right there in, is it Westchester, you said?
Well, Westminster. And it's, you know, I'm about 25 minutes from Boulder, where the mountains, the Rockies take off. And, you know, Colorado, half of Colorado's Kansas and the other half Switzerland, you know, and it's just great living here.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, my friend, hey, if you ever want to talk again, give me a call.
I absolutely will. And there's a lot of stuff we could talk about. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Have Guitar Will Travel. You can catch up on all the things I'm doing at thedeadlies.com. And I'm on all the social media platforms as well. And please support Vintage Guitar and all the wonderful things they do, because they do many, many wonderful things for us guitar players. Thanks. Please subscribe. Please tell a friend. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys.